Nice to see you all. Today we're obviously trying something a little bit new, trying to do a lesson by video, so I really hope that it works well. There's a lot of really important things that we have to get through today, both about religious experience and about the topic of miracles, and of course both of those will be coming up in the exam that you have in January. We won't do the full minute silence in this kind of lesson, but maybe if you're okay, we can just have a short moment of peace and quiet just to help bring our attention here. Okay, thank you very much. Today we're going to look at William James on religious experience and some challenges to religious experience. We're going to go over the stuff we did on miracles in the summer again. So that was looking at different examples of miracles, different definitions of miracles, and then moving on to look at the criticisms of miracles, one from the atheist philosopher Hume and the theological criticism of miracles coming from Maurice Wiles. So how this is going to work, that there'll be roughly 30 minutes on each section. I'm not going to talk to you for 2 hours, so you don't need to worry about that. But for each section I'll introduce the topic for about, 3, 4, 5 minutes, something like that. And then you'll have 25 minutes or so to do an exercise on it. And then we can play the next bit of the video, and I'll introduce the next topic, go through some ideas about that, and then you can do another exercise and so on. So the 2 hours is basically divided into 4 lots of half an hour. So again, I hope that works well. So the first thing is on William James on mystical experience. And there are 4 key aspects that he says mystical experiences have. One way I've used to remember this in the past is using the word pint. So P-I-N-T somehow captures all of these things. The first one is that a mystical experience is passive. Yeah? So the opposite of passive, of course, is active. So it feels like something that happens to you. It's not something that you can choose to make happen. Okay? So tonight you can choose to go home, you can choose to watch on TV, Coronation Street, EastEnders, news, whatever it is. All those things are decisions that are directly in your control. Or you could choose to go out with your friends, choose to catch up with your homework, whatever it is. But you can't choose to have a mystical experience. So it's something that seems to happen to somebody. It's almost like a gift. And this is where ideas like grace come in, almost a freely given gift to the person. So they're passive. There are things you could do that might make a mystical experience more likely. If you were to fast or pray intensely or meditate intensely, it makes these experiences more likely, but they can't be produced according to William James. Okay, there's something that happens to a person. So the first characteristic of mystical experience is that they're passive. So the I stands for ineffable. So they can't be fully put into words. They can't be captured in ordinary human language. It seems to me that some relatively ordinary aspects of experience may in some ways be ineffable too. So to use a very mundane example, if we think about Paris, if I knew all the facts and figures about Paris, how tall the Eiffel Tower was, and how many people lived in Paris, what its main industries are, etc., I'd know a lot of information about Paris. However, if I were to actually go there, directly experiencing Paris may give me a knowledge that I don't have in any other way. So again, maybe there's that sense of ineffability that you need to really directly experience something to fully know it. And that's certainly true according to William James of mystical experience. It can't be put into words, it can't be tied down. It's something that a person has to experience for themselves. And St. Teresa puts it like this: I wish I could give a description of at least the smallest part of what I learned, but when I try to discover a way of doing so, I find it impossible. So mystical experiences are passive, they're ineffable, and they're also noetic. They have a noetic quality. And what this means is that they lead to a kind of insight, that the person knows something that they didn't know before. So in this way, mystical experiences can't be dismissed as simply a high, a kind of buzz or an elated mood that one comes down from and is the same afterwards. A mystical experience is profoundly transformative. It changes the person's character, changes how they speak, changes how they think and how they act. So it's a deeply powerful thing, and there's some insights that are revealed through this. How might we understand these kind of insights that come from mystical experience? It seems to be one thing that might give us at least a clue as to what it might mean is the preciousness of life. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences where we're caught up in something superficial, something that doesn't matter so much, something somewhat shallow. And then maybe something jolts us out of that. We may hear that a friend is sick, or we may hear that somebody we love has died. There may be something on the news or something we see on a film. All kinds of things might just jolt us out of that kind of superficiality that the little things in life are to get so caught up in and wound up by. And there might be a greater sense of perspective that begins to open up. And we know again, directly, we experience the preciousness of life, and we're less likely to be caught up in trivialities. So that kind of thing might give us a clue as to what William James means by the noetic quality of experience. They lead to insight. The person knows something that they didn't know before. That leads us on to the final aspect of religious experience, the T, which is that they're transient. So although the knowledge that a mystical experience brings, according to William James, is transformative, it changes the person's life in a fundamental way, the actual experience is relatively transient. It comes and goes quite quickly. Yeah, so maybe a couple of minutes, maybe as long as even a couple of hours, but they pass, they're relatively transient. So the experience is relatively short-lived, but the effects are much more long-lasting. James goes on to describe some of the effects of religious experience, the feeling of being in a wider life than that of this world's little interests, and a conviction of the existence of an ideal power, a sense of the friendly continuity of the ideal power with our own lives, and a willingness to surrender to it, elation and freedom as the outlines of confusing self would melt down, a shifting of the emotional centre towards loving and harmonious affections, asceticism, strength of soul, purity, charity, religious rapture, moral enthusiasm, ontological wonder, and cosmic emotion. Yeah, just to take one of those points in a little bit more depth, when we're talking about loving and harmonious affections, we're talking about a different kind of motivation, really. So the person is not so motivated by greed or by pushing things away, by getting one over on other people, by kind of seeing life as one big sort of rat race. But there's a shift towards more kind, loving, compassionate motivations. But also, as William James says, that brings with it a great joy. It's not a kind of punishment. Yeah, it's not a kind of punishment he's talking about. He's talking about a profound, joyful shift that also leads to a kind of way of being with others. Having looked at James's arguments for religious experience, mystical experience, just briefly consider some of the challenges to religious experience. There are 4 key ones that we can look at: vicious circle challenge, conflicting claims challenge, psychological challenge, and anti-realist challenge. The vicious circle challenge is that the religious experience tends to depend upon the background of the person having it. So Christians have Christian religious experiences in general, Hindus have Hindu religious experiences, Buddhists have Buddhist religious experiences, etc. So the idea would be that the religious experience reflects the existing belief. So in other words, belief comes first and experience follows, rather than the experience somehow shaping or being foundational of the belief. So in that way, that's undercutting the idea that religious experience could somehow provide a foundation or a proof for religious beliefs and statements. Conflicting claims challenge is that religions say very different things. Just to give you one example, obviously for Christians, Jesus is the Son of God, and for Muslims, he is a prophet. And it's likely, although this is arguable to be honest, but it's likely that both of these can't be true. So if one's right, the other's wrong, and vice versa. But if Christian religious experiences are said to justify and prove Christianity, and Muslim religious experiences are said to justify and prove Islam, then there's a problem. Because if both can't be true, then that indicates that the religious experiences can't be somehow knocked down truths, knocked down proofs for the truths of those religions. Yeah? So if one isn't true, it leads to what David Hume calls a complete triumph for the skeptic. Because the religions conflict, they really undermine each other's claims to truth based on religious experience. The psychological challenge is the view that religious experiences are essentially something happening in the mind, and that they don't point to any reality independent of the mind. So religious experiences can be explained completely in terms of a person's mental state. One example of that famously is Freud, who would see mystical experience as a kind of regression, going back in time, going back to childhood, to a kind of oceanic feeling when everything was at one, everything was blissful before the complications of adult life arise. So rather than William James, who's seeing mystical experience as something that brings insight, Freud is seeing it as something that really signifies a kind of a backward step, a regression rather than a sense of progress. The final challenge is the anti-realist challenge. This is tough, it's difficult. If you don't understand it straight away, don't worry, we can talk about that when I see you face to face. But this is really the idea that religious belief is created by a culture. So when you're in a culture, you learn to behave in particular ways. If you take part in the culture of going to football matches, you learn to cheer for your team, you learn to, unfortunately, swear and perhaps sometimes say abusive things about the ref or the other side and all those kind of things. But these behaviours are learned. And as part of that learning, you also experience certain things. When your team scores, you feel elated, you feel delighted. When they lose, you feel depressed. But all of those ways of behaving, all of those experiences are very much part of the culture of watching football. And so too the anti-realist challenge would maintain with religion. In other words, religious truths are somehow learned within a culture, and within that culture people have religious experiences. But they're part of the culture, shaped by the culture, and again can't be seen as something that somehow founds or grounds religious belief in any fundamental way.